Oh, yeah. Cyrie's going to record. Um, so there are a couple people who couldn't be here tonight. So, and we will also share the recording with everyone afterwards. Um, so, as a resource for people. Um, yeah. So, like I said earlier, I work for Harvest Pierce County, which is a program of the Pierce Conservation District. If you've never heard of a conservation district, you are in good company. Most counties in the country have a conservation district, but I bet I didn't know what a conservation district was before I went to work for one. We're not unlike a library or a local parks district where it's you pay, property owners pay taxes to fund our programming. And we are specifically aimed at preserving the natural resources of the community. So we have programs that work with healthy shorelines, like specific farm programming. Harvest Pierce County is kind of like our community agriculture program, which supports all of the urban gardens and community gardens in the county. We also have like water quality programming, lots of stuff going on. Farm Foundations takes place at the Franklin Pierce, the farm at Franklin Pierce, which is a partnership that goes back to about 2014, maybe even slightly longer than that. We will also be at Mother Earth Farm this year, which we're very excited about. But I'm going to let the folks there tell you all about their farm because they know more about it than I do. But our Farm Foundations started in 2018, and it grew out of a program that was happening at Franklin Pierce Farm called Veggie Co-op, which was basically just like a big community garden where folks garden together. So it wasn't like individual plots, but there was a farm plan that was created and people volunteered to implement that plan and then got a share of the vegetables that were grown. And over the years that that program was in place, there was a lot of feedback that folks wanted more intentional education and not just to work there. So Farm Foundations was the next step out of that. And like I said earlier, this is our fourth cohort of folks going through the program. So we're still a pretty new program, all things considered, though it is our fifth program year. This little map on the side here, there's I'm not going to be able to remember the website, but I think it's a university, one of the universities in California has a map website where you can type in where you live and it will show you a map of all of the Native people who have lived there and still live there, all of the different tribes. So that's what this map is showing, all of the territories of the traditional homelands here. Our farm sits in the Summit Midland area, which is the Salish Puyallup tribe lands. Someone brought up the Meekers earlier, and that was who originally colonized this area, and there's still that, Meeker mansion. I went to school in downtown Puyallup, and that was always like a weird field trip you would take to go see the Meeker's house. Yeah, so they were the first like white folks to use this land for farming. When the federal government formally approved the land rights, they subplatted a lot of the area, and basically from when that happened to when the farm was donated to the school district, it was kind of grazed. And when it was donated to the school district in the 1970s, they tried to do programming there for a couple of decades. And with like, I think one of the teachers there told me that at one point, like every third grader in the school district raised a pig at the farm, which sounds like a lot to manage to me. And I think the school district agreed because they shut that down. And then the farm sat vacant and kind of mismanaged and unused for a number of years. And it wasn't until they were kind of starting the conversation at the school district of what they wanted to do with that property right around the same time that Harvest Pierce County was looking for a piece of land to start this kind of community garden project. So it was very serendipitous that those two things happened at the same time. And we've been holding programming there ever since. And the school district has also enormously expanded their programming as well. So you will, those of you who are will be coming on the Thursday field days, you'll get to see some of the high school classes that are held at the farm. And on Saturdays, there are also volunteer community groups that come out. So a lot of folks make use of this space, and it's turned into a really important community resource. We did this. Okay, no, we didn't do this. We did introductions earlier. Okay, so I'm going to put you into breakout rooms. So if you haven't done that before, a little thing will pop up on your screen inviting you to join a specific room. And you just click accept. And I'm going to give you a little bit of time, maybe 8-ish minutes to talk about these questions. We kind of covered this a little bit already about why you wanted to come to the program, but I want to dig a little bit more into what sort of questions you're bringing with you, what you're hoping to learn, and also so like at the end of the year, what will success look like for you? Because I really want to not just deliver this programming based off what I think you should learn, but also what you want to be learning. So I'm going to ask one person to try and keep track of what's said in the breakout rooms and report back a little bit so that we all can hear what you want to be learning. Thank you, Saire. So Saire dropped those in the chat. If you open the chat now, that will like stay with you in the breakout rooms. And now I need to ominous sounding. Okay, so let's go around group by group and hear what you all talked about. And you were also like kind of alphabetically arranged in your group. So we'll just go alphabetically. Maybe we'll go backwards. So the group that had like Valeria and Ursula, whoever is speaking for that group, why don't you share what you talked about?
Is that me? I think that's me. Can someone confirm that that was definitely me?
It's not you.
No.
Oh, just kidding.
Thank you, though.
But if no one from that group knows that they're going, Felicia, you can go first. That's also fine.
I think it was our group. I'll talk. Kind of all of us had the same motivation for signing up, just that we're interested in learning more about farming and gardening in terms of questions that came up. Topics were crop rotation, succession planning, just best practices, things that have worked really well for you all in the Northwest. And then in terms of the end of the year success, we said would just be more knowledge, that we know more than we know now.
Cool, thank you. Okay. So like the group that maybe had Kayla and Leah in it.
Yep, that was us. So we almost shared a lot of interests. Leslie shared that she wants to learn as much as possible. And I think we all shared in that collectively. A lot of us shared that we want to learn as much as we can about soil and keeping it as natural as possible. Kayla had mentioned that she had a mentor who motivated her to kind of pursue her passion, something that she's thought of as, you know, a secret passion that she's had, but something that she'd love to do full time. And I'm sure a lot of us have felt that same way. Leah shared that they have a passion for family, community, being able to grow food for that environment and being able to be a resource for those in need. And also at the end, having a goal to be able to grow a full head of corn. We thought that was funny, but that's an awesome goal. And so again, we just all shared in a lot of the interests that we have together, a passion for farming, being able to learn as much as we can, and then just get our hands dirty to be able to learn and apply that.
Thank you. I think Erica will be your corn buddy for the year.
Absolutely and positively. Corn and beans, I'm your guy.
Isaac, and maybe this is your group, Felicia.
Yes. Okay. Motivations, we had a lot. We talked about hands-on learning, connecting with people, having more background and technical knowledge, being in right relationship with the land, and also learning business practices. Questions include how farm work reflects to or relates to social and food justice issues, what kind of role I can play within a system, and kind of specialties and expertise that develop, alternative land access, and sustainable practices, both for the land and also the people, and then soil science. Success for us could look like acquiring a greater depth of knowledge, developing meaningful friendships and greater confidence in our farming skills, and having more clarity on our goals related to participating in agricultural systems.
Cool. That's great. Devin, the folks who are in Devin's group.
That I will speak for our group. So a lot of the motivation in our group was around having other interests and hoping to be able to blend that with either agriculture or horticultural. Two of us are interested in doing horticultural therapy, and the other group member wants to combine crafting and distillery with agriculture. Questions are just more about the business aspect about farming, behind why things work and do not work in the garden. More questions around summer, fall, and harvesting concepts. And our success for the group, we all want just a better foundation and knowledge around farming. One person will like possibly a job with Pierce County District, and just building our toolkit and being better growers.
Great. Okay, and the last group, so that would be like Amira and Angelina.
Okay, so our group had a lot of, our motivations, our curiosities were about seeds and soil, and then what does community farming look like? We had hopes of learning more about soil science, all about, you know, the organisms within it, how does farming and animals impact it, and kind of the systems that create healthy soil. We shared interest in permaculture, you know, looking at crop rotation and sustaining the soil, and also kind of leaning into food justice and then communities, and how can farming empower and engage and involve community members in creating those reciprocal and collaborative relationships. There's a lot of interest in seeds and seed saving as well. And so our questions were, what is the framework for farm and garden plots? What does community farming look like in different spaces? You know, backyards, farms, small urban garden plots. And then how are livestock and animals involved to help make a farm successful? And that's the summary of our conversation.
Thank you. It sounds like you all covered a lot of ground in the 10 minutes you were chatting. And it's great for us just to hear what questions you have, what you're hoping to learn, because that lets us really, you know, gauge what topics we touch on. We have a lot of flexibility to, you know, craft what we're doing here to better fit what you're hoping to learn. So I'm hopeful that we can, I don't think I heard anything mentioned that we won't at least touch on in this class. So that is off, we're already off to a good start. And I also realized I was going to go over the syllabus. Did folks have a chance to look at that? Getting a lot of head nods. Okay. So maybe I will just, instead of like sharing my screen and going through the whole thing, I will just, if you haven't had a chance to read through that, to please read through it. We are talking soil next week. Our class list, that schedule should be pretty much what our schedule is. Our director at Harvest Pierce County is Kristen McIver. This is like the thing that she least likes to advertise about herself, but she has like a PhD in soil science. So you will be learning from a real expert for the next couple of weeks about all things soil. Romy Haberly is going to be teaching like our plant science class. She's a professor at PLU. Any of the classes that don't have an asterisk behind it, either I will be teaching or Erica will be teaching. We're also really excited that we are kind of combining our fruit tree education series with Farm Foundations this year. So we're going to have 2 fruit tree classes taught by one of our coworkers. His name is Chris Madden, who is crazy about fruit trees. Just will talk your ear off about fruit trees for as long as you will let him. So in addition to the 2 classes that he's going to be teaching, we're also going to be having a couple of field days throughout the season where he comes out and we actually get to work on some of the trees at Franklin Pierce Farm, and at Mother Earth maybe. And we're probably going to have a 3rd fruit tree class in the fall. You might have noticed that I think like 3 of those classes were left blank. And that is in large part because we like to see what it is, what topics you guys are really wanting more information on before we decide what the wrap-up classes are going to be. In the past, we've had like 3 classes just about crop rotation and succession planning. We've had folks come in from Washington Farmland Trust and talk about land access. We've had more business-oriented classes. So whatever it is that we're all hoping to learn about, those fall classes is where we'll get to do some of the wrap-up, tying loose ends for the program. We also, as Juniper mentioned, we have some farm tours scheduled. So those weeks are going to be a little bit different. We scheduled them for Saturdays because we felt like there was a better chance of folks who come to Thursday field days would be able to come to a Saturday farm tour than the folks who can't come on Thursdays being able to go to a farm tour that day. So there won't be a field day on the days that we have farm tours. And that's just kind of going to be how it is. There will still be Thursday field days that day. So if you usually come on Saturday and can come on a Thursday and want to come, you can. And if you usually come on a Thursday and don't feel like devoting 2 days of your week, you can miss that Thursday. I'm giving you permission now. And we also, like I said earlier, are going to be out at Mother Earth 1 week a month and getting to work out there. They're a much larger farm than, not in terms of like total size, but in terms of production. They are much larger than Franklin Pierce and they farm in a pretty different way. So it's going to be a really wonderful opportunity for all of you to kind of compare methods and how things are done and the different scales, and see where you think you fit in on that spectrum. Yeah, were there any, I think those were kind of the big things to point out on the syllabus. Was there any questions that folks had off the bat? And you can unmute yourself if you have a question about the syllabus.
And I'll add, Madeline, Colette put in the chat some questions about the dates. And for the evening classes, there were some in October that went Wednesday, so we might need to double check. But
that's just a typo. In the past, these evening classes have always been on Wednesdays, so I just made a mistake. They are on Tuesdays. I can revise that and send out the correct days. Thank you. Okay, were there any other questions? No. Okay.
I didn't have a question, but I did forget to mention in my intro that I'm also going to be one of the farmers who's having a farm tour at the end of the year. And I just wanted to let you all know that I would be very, very happy to have you all out at my farm for my farm tour. And like, obviously it's fine if you don't make it. My farm is in its 2nd year of production, and it is tied to the Pierce Conservation District and the city of Tacoma. I farm on a vacant city lot. And yeah, I just wanted to like put that out there that like I am part of Harvest Pierce County, and like I will be helping lead Saturday work parties, and I will also be a farmer, like aside from being like a facilitator of this program. And I would love to see all of you at my farm in August.
Yeah. Yeah, we've already got it all planned out. on top of things this season. Yeah, I'm really excited about the farms that we're gonna be visiting. It sounds like some of you work on many of them, so it'll be great, I think, to have all of you there and be able to add to the context that the farmers share.
Madeline, we received another question in the chat. Would you be able to explain a little bit more of what a workday would look like?
Sure, that's a great question. Work days, so our first field days are on March 17th and 19th. And those will be mostly orientation days. So you'll come to the farm at Franklin Pierce, but we won't really be doing a lot of work. We're going to be walking around and we're going to be, explaining how different systems work, different safety requirements. We'll be kind of just exploring all of the different parts of the farm, explaining the history, and answering any questions. So you'll have a chance to get acclimated to the space before we jump into working there. A work day kind of looks different week to week. In the beginning of the season, we will probably be doing a lot of seeding in the greenhouse. We might be doing some bed prep, which involves a lot of like wheelbarrows full of compost in the rain, which is everyone's. If you come back after that day, that's how I know that you're dedicated to the program. Only 4 years of experience. And in the summer, we do a lot of harvesting, a lot of spring and summer. The farm of Franklin Pierce grows year round. Like they give food to the cafeteria, their cafeteria system, like every week of the year. So transplanting is kind of something that we always are going to be doing. Harvesting in the summer, a lot of harvesting in the summer. And then in the fall, there's harvesting and some like kind of end of season, like cleaning up the fields that we do. So that's one of the nice things about this program is that even though you're not at the farm every day, you do get to see it in all different seasons and get the chance to do all of those different tasks that come with working on a farm full time. Yeah, so, okay, so we have any last questions before I move on? Okay, so I'm gonna kind of probably go through these slides kind of quickly. We have these classes dedicated from 6 to 8, and today, because we introduced ourselves and are taking some time to get to know one another, I think we'll probably go until 8, but our hope is that usually we will have 20-30 minutes where we'll have time for questions at the end. And if people don't have questions, we can end a little bit early, because I think Zoom time is not the same as like in-person time. And I want to respect that it's late and it's hard to be online this often. So just for your own planning, know that we will try to end a little bit early most of the time, but probably not tonight as we're already at 7:20. Okay. Now that we've talked about everything else, the title of this class is Introductions and Agroecology. So now we're going to talk about agroecology. And what we're really talking about when we're talking about agroecology is ecosystems, kind of the basis of everything in the world, ecosystems. The 6th grade biology textbook definition is a biological community of interacting organisms and their physical environment. So what does that look like? It can look like the Puget Sound. It can look like Western Washington. It can look like Mount Rainier National Park. The Pacific Ocean is an ecosystem. The globe is an ecosystem. Also, you know, your apartment is an ecosystem, and any network or interconnected system can be considered its own ecosystem. So offices that you work in, families you're a part of, all of that counts. And obviously, that can be pretty simple, like a fishbowl is fairly defined little ecosystem, or it can be very complex. So somewhere on the scale between a globe and a fishbowl, we have farms and working on farms. And our farm is definitely its own little ecosystem where we have students and high school students and high school teachers, community volunteers, all of you working there, all of the plants that we grow, all of the trees that existed there. There's a lot of animals that come on and off the farm. And as a couple of people mentioned, a lot of like microorganisms in the soil, and the soil being its own very complex ecosystem. So I think we all, you know, have a basic understanding that keeping these systems healthy and balanced is generally a good thing, and that there can be some pretty nasty consequences for when these systems become unbalanced. I was like reviewing the recording of this class from 2 years ago, and I mentioned that I had found this nifty Puget Sound vital sign thing on the internet, and you know, stolen it without attributing it to who did it. And then someone in the class like worked for the organization that created this great graphic, and she was able to talk about more of the like is going into this, but there is like a government, I think it's like a subset of the Department of Ecology, but they created this to actually track the health of the Puget Sound. And I think it's a really nice example of how comprehensive it is. And it's not, you know, just orcas and other major animals that we're familiar with, but it's also, you know, humans and air quality and all of the other things that we might not take into account right away when we're thinking of our own ecosystem. But yeah, so farming is its own little ecosystem. This class is now a new ecosystem that we're all a part of. And it's kind of a foundational idea for what we base our farming practices on. Unfortunately, it is not so much what our conventional agricultural system bases their farming practices on. There's an asterisk behind conventional because conventional kind of means, like, to me, that means like the way that things have like always been done, like the traditional way of farming. And I think it's important to point out that this is actually a pretty new way of doing things in the grand scheme of things. Our agricultural system as it exists right now really didn't look like this until post World War II, and it didn't really get to be quite so consolidated into large scale farms until like the 70s and 80s. So this is a relatively new way of existing. And I think it's important to acknowledge that. And also I find it kind of hopeful that, you know, this isn't actually just the default. These were decisions that we made, and maybe they're decisions that we can unmake. So yeah, the way that agriculture works in the US at the moment, for the most part, is that we don't work in concert with the natural world. Instead, we treat it more like a non-living resource to meet our own needs. And you can really see this in how the system is structured. 4% of the total number of farms in the US farm over 58% of the land. 74% of farmland is used for grains, oil seeds, cattle, dairy, kind of those big commodity crops. And only 3% is used for specialty crops. And I actually, if you want to, I would love to know, like, if you want to put in the chat, like, what you might think a vegetable, like a specialty crop is, just like a guess. I would love to see some guesses. Herbs. That's a good guess. Flowers. An heirloom tomato, heirloom veg, lentils. I'm not sure if lentils count as lentils might be a grain. Lettuce. Yeah. Medicinals. Anything other than corn. Yeah, I'm gonna say Amira probably got it closest. Only 3% of farmland is used for specialty crops, and specialty crops is a category that includes just about every vegetable that you would buy at the grocery store. So yeah, tomatoes, any sort of tomato, doesn't have to be an heirloom, any herb, cucumbers, squash, the whole 9 yards. Everything that you would think of as like a normal staple vegetable is in like USDA, like Department of Agriculture, is deemed a specialty crop, which is just a weird mindset to think of, but a useful reminder of what this system is set up to support and what it's not really set up to support. A really sad kind of statistic is that up to 50% of the food produced in this whole system goes to waste. I think one of the things to really, one of the things that I obviously have issues with the conventional ag system. I think there are a lot of things that need to change sustainably, but one of the remarkable things about it is just how much food it produces. We could be feeding everybody if we had like the political will to be getting the food that's grown to the people who need it. So in terms of quantity, there's no problem with this system. And it's doing what it's supposed to be. But any system that is this large, I think in the last couple of years has shown us like that there are a lot of vulnerabilities that come with that. One of them being that it's really input heavy, which means that you're not relying on the natural resources that you're being given by your own patch of land to help support what you're doing. Instead, you're bringing in a lot of inputs. So all of your like fertilizer needs, even, you know, labor is an input. It's all really extractive in this system. And there's not a lot of regeneration or energy cycling that's happening. So that is definitely a downside. It's also a lot of like kind of chemical heavy. So that's one of the inputs too. You're not depending on like beneficial insects to be helping you with other pest problems. You're just spraying your crops. And part of that is that there's not a lot of room for error when you are trying to produce this much food. And when you're trying to feed this many people. So you have to be really sure that you're going to get consistent results. And the way that we have decided to do that is to spray a lot of chemicals and to mechanize a lot of things, which is, you know, creates its own set of problems. There's also just been a generational shift away from farming. At the big, especially like, you know, a couple hundred years ago, a really large percentage of the population were farmers in some capacity. Even up until like the 1970s, people didn't really get all of their produce at the grocery store. Like that would, like people were still growing a lot of their own staple foods. Now, only 1% of the US population are farmers. And there's a lot of history that explains why that is. Just kind of a general trend towards urbanization is definitely part of it. But there was also a huge push. There was a farm crisis in the 80s, which we're not going to talk about extensively, but the Secretary of Agriculture at the time, the tagline was like, get big or get out. So there were a lot of like family farms who were struggling and were pretty much abandoned by the US government. And if you couldn't like farm 500 acres of soybeans, wasn't worth it. So yeah, there's a lot of unfortunate things that have been happening in the system for a long time, and it's created a lot of inequities, and it's created a lack of resiliency within our food system, which with all of like the different supply chain issues that have been happening in the last couple of years have, I think for maybe the first time for a lot of folks, really highlighted some of these concerns. I don't know if there would be a correlation with a mental health. I'm sure you could find things to support that. There is, Kristen might talk about this next week, but there is like actual studies that suggest that like getting your hands dirty, like in soil, there's like, can improve your mental health. Like there are actual like scientific benefits. But yeah, I'll remind her to touch on that next week. But yeah, So kind of the unfortunate, like, this system was developed to try and support our growing populations, not just in the US, but globally. California exports a huge amount of food. My parents moved to Taiwan a couple of years ago, and for the first like 6 months they lived there, my mom just kept sending me photos of all of the food that she found at the grocery store that, said like product of Washington, product of California. She's like, why did I wear this? It's just like I'm shopping at home. So this system was supported or was created to feed all of these billions of people, but we haven't been paying attention to the land that we're farming enough to make sure that this is a sustainable way forward. So we're now looking at a lot of environmental impacts that make it a scary proposition for what our food system is going to look like within the next few decades. Okay. So this is just like a little chart kind of showing some of the priorities maybe of this conventional agricultural system. The bottom line, of course, being money, which isn't, a inherently bad thing. You need to be able to make a living off of farming if that's what you want to be doing. But like most things in our society, we've taken that to kind of the extreme. So seeing humans as resources, like labor, the labor force, all of those many inputs that I was talking about earlier, those come from somewhere. So that's also resource extraction from another ecosystem. All of that in the name of as much production as possible, so that, the growers are getting as much money as possible. A lot of farming is not often like a super financially, some people are making a lot of money in farming and a lot of people are not. So to make it, you really do have to look at all of those costs pretty closely. And unfortunately, like a big, well, personally, what I see as a big failure of our system is that that 3% of specialty crops, which makes up kind of the vast majority of food that we get, those are the growers that aren't being given much in the way of government support. If you pay attention to like the ag bill is a big, huge piece of legislation that has to be passed every maybe 5 years. And a lot of money goes towards agriculture and goes even directly to farmers. But most of that goes to subsidize those commodity growers, and not to what we would really think of as food. So yeah, a lot of unfortunate things, which is why it is great that you are all here interested in local agriculture and becoming more knowledgeable about how to grow your own food and all of that. And the people who farm this way are not inherently bad. Like I said, there's just been this massive shift and push in a lot of ways to farm how we farm. So this isn't like, I don't like to speak in generalities and like say that this is like, you know, like an evil system or anything like that. You hear a lot of, in like the small farm sustainable food world, you hear a lot of like very fiery rhetoric about about like big scale agriculture. And while there's obviously a lot of problems, it is also how the majority of us get our food. So I don't want to bash it too much. I do think there's room for improvement though. Okay. And this is some of that history that I was talking about earlier, that contributes to how the system looks today. This is, there's so much that goes into just these two little pie chart type graphics. So the brief spiel I'm going to give right now doesn't really begin to touch on all of it, but it is one of the things that we like to try and do in this class is provide context for the things that you're going to be learning, and where practices come from and how things look the way they look. And one of the things that you really can't avoid if you're trying to provide a holistic viewpoint is the history of race in agriculture in the US. So the green pie chart there shows ownership, farmland ownership by different racial groups. So the really huge, almost the entirety of the circle, that is all of the farmland that's owned by white people in the country. And then those tiny little slivers are what is owned by Black farmers and Latinx farmers. There might be like a pixel of like native farmers or, you know, any other type of farmer, but this shows like how few people of color are able to own land and yeah, in this country. And that was not an accident. During like the Reconstruction era, after the Civil War, actually quite a lot of Black folks owned farmland, and they were systematically driven off of the land through like terrorism groups, like the KKK. Even the USDA had a really long history of predatory lending, exclusionary lending, that made it so that these folks couldn't continue farming when they weren't being given the same sort of opportunities as white farmers. There's all of the Jim Crow laws that made it really hard. So that is part of what a lot of folks moved out of the South to the North. And that was how a lot of that farmland that was in Black hands ended up being lost. Another big disparity today is the people who actually work on farms versus the people who manage farms. So on the left, 80% of farm workers identify as Latinx, as opposed to 3% of farm managers who do. One of the things that I think people have this misconception, you know, we see, and I even like had those photos up earlier of like those big tractors, you know, mowing lots of like acres, hundreds of acres. And I think that a lot of people have this idea that our food system is a lot more mechanized than it actually is. The reality is that most of your food is actually like picked by somebody. Syre actually sends me a lot of great videos on Instagram of farm workers doing amazing feats of speed harvesting. And so, yeah, this isn't, these folks aren't getting paid very much in Washington just this year, like just in the last few months. A bill was passed to allow farm workers to receive overtime pay. Before that, they weren't eligible for that. So a lot of abuses built into this system. And yeah, like I said, there's a lot that goes into this. I mean, we didn't even mention that all of this land that we're farming was stolen from the native folks who lived here before anyone else came. So it's just something that you have to be aware of and contend with if you are going to be working in the food system, and know who isn't being included in these conversations and who is being actively excluded from these conversations. Even in the last year, like a recent example in the, I don't know if it was some of the COVID relief, like bills, or maybe it was like the Build Back Better. I don't know which bill it was, but the Biden administration tried to earmark a certain amount of federal dollars specifically for farmers of color for debt relief. So not even, so this would just be like money that they had already spent, like helping them pay off farm loans, to help them keep farming in, you know, this ridiculous situation that we've all found ourselves in the last couple of years. And almost immediately, white farmers filed a lawsuit saying that this was a discriminatory practice. And the farmers of color, predominantly Black farmers, haven't seen any of that money yet after being promised millions of dollars in relief, because it's tied up in the courts, because white farmers who receive a lot of aid from the US government have decided that debt relief for farmers of color is not something that should be allowed. So still happening today. And yeah, we just have to know that these are dynamics that are going on to have a full picture of the food system. Okay. So given all of that, how are we trying to bring those ecosystems and keeping ecosystems healthy and in balance back into our agricultural system? And that is really the lens that we are trying to farm through. The study of food production through the lens of ecosystems and sustainable management. We are the conservation district, so we kind of have to take into account sustainable management, but it's also, to us, the best way to be orienting ourselves, as opposed to seeing the land just as a resource, something to be taken advantage of and like meet like an means to an end. We really view the land as a partner and a teacher in meeting our production needs. So it's definitely a cultural, like a mindset shift of how you think about this. But it is nothing new. This is literally how humans existed with the earth for millennia. Here in the Puget Sound, a great example of that is the Camas prairie agriculture of the Coast Salish people. This black and white photo is a Salish woman harvesting and like processing camas bulbs. So these purple flowers are camas flowers, and they grow, we think of them now as like a wildflower, but they were intentionally planted and cultivated by the Salish people and then harvested, and the bulbs were eaten as like a staple food. I think unfortunately, one of the like things that we've maybe all been hearing about more is the intentional forest management that Native tribes, especially in California, like the fire management that happened for years, centuries before the US government put a stop to it, and how that has led to these massive fires that we're seeing now. So the overall gist of this is that humans are not always a negative influence on the natural world. We are capable of living pretty harmoniously and actually improving our environment. I think that there's often this idea that nature is something that exists outside of ourselves. Like, I'm going to go visit nature today by driving to a national park or going to the beach, when nature is really everything around us and we are not separate from it. This agroforestry practice that has been happening in Japan for hundreds of years, as more of that population moved to cities, and as Japan has a very like elderly population, and so there's like fewer younger people live in the countryside. So this is actually like fewer people are living in these ecosystems, but because they're not actively managing these spaces, the health of these forests are declining. So it's not, we're not all is lost in terms of how we interact with the world around us. We have the capacity to improve the ecosystems we're a part of. And I think for me, that's a really hopeful thing to think about, that, we're not all just, the world wouldn't necessarily be better off if we weren't here. So on the farm, what does all of that look like? I'm not really going to get into all of this right now, because this is like the meat of what we're going to be talking about basically all year, both in classes and on the farm. So I'm just putting these words in front of you so that they maybe stick in your head. But yeah, this is like how it all plays out. Our long-term goal is sustainability. How do we produce food sustainably, and how do we make that look as much like a natural system as possible? And is there a question? Permaculture. Yeah, permaculture is a popular method. And that's actually a good thing to bring up, because permaculture is like something, I forget he's Australian. A lot of like regenerative or organic or permaculture, like all of the like buzzwords that are thrown around in kind of this even like sustainable farming world. There's inevitably like a white guy who wrote a book about it that is like oh, this is like where this came from. And no, that's usually wrong. So hopefully some of that racial history that we touched on, and also some of the teachings that we'll be going through in the next few months together, will help pique your interest in where all of these practices actually came from. And so that is it. Congratulations. You are all ecosystem stewards now, which you all already have been. also. You might maybe just didn't know it yet. So we are ending the night and starting this program with the question of how do we grow food ethically and sustainably to preserve the land, its living inhabitants, and ourselves. Yeah, so that's the end of the presentation, end of our first class together. I'll open it up for questions before we go.
Are these type of classes available in other languages for other language groups, if I can say it like that?
These classes specifically are not, but Sire has been working with a Spanish language radio station to do a lot of our gardening classes, specifically in Spanish. So we can share those with you.
I think I saw that. Yeah, I think I saw that. That's actually pretty cool to have it on the radio. Thank you.
Yeah, it's definitely a goal to hopefully expand into more languages in the future. I unfortunately am only an English speaker.
That's okay. That's cool. Thank you.
We will, to just piggyback off of that real quick, we will have, I think, 8 new videos this year that will be in Spanish and English on different like gardening topics that will be like, we'll be going through VT radio for that. And again, that will just be in English and in Spanish. That's what we have for this year.
Okay. I'm just thinking of my mom. She's retired and, elderly, and she's very near to Washington. So she's from San Salvador, so she's a total city person. She's tried to like grow her own corn, and she gets these tiny little things. She gets really disappointed. So I'm like, maybe I can try and find something for her where she can also, I think she would really enjoy it. Yeah. Thank you. I'll keep an eye.
That's great feedback. Thank you.
Any other questions before I let y'all go?
Do you think you could share some more resources or like books on the history of just, like how the native land was stolen and kind of things like about how you talked about how Biden passed the law to give relief to the farmers. I just feel like sometimes I have trouble finding more information on that. And so just, I don't know if you know any good websites with articles about that to learn more.
Yeah, totally. The email I sent a month or so ago, the book that I mentioned in there, Farming While Black, they do a pretty good job of giving kind of a historical overview. But I will find a few more articles and send them out. So I will send out the slides that I used tonight, the link to the recording, and any other resources. So that will be an email that gets sent to you in the next few days.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so it is after 8 o'clock, and I really want to respect our end time. So you are free to go. If you have a question and want to stay on, I will stay on for a few more minutes, but otherwise, have a good night and I will see you next week.
Thank you so much.